$400 billion. That's what historians estimate one African king was worth. And you've probably never heard his name. 400 billion. But here's what nobody's telling you. He wasn't even the richest person who ever lived. That title goes to men who controlled 25% of the entire world's economy. Men who owned entire continents. Men whose wealth makes Jeff Bezos look like he's collecting spare change. And yet, open any history textbook. Go ahead, flip through it. You won't find them. Why? Let me show you exactly what's really happening. Mansa Musa, Augustus Caesar, Akbar the Great. Write those down because your teachers never did. Here's the key. These weren't just rich. They operated on a scale that breaks our understanding of wealth. When Mansa Musa went on pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he brought 60,000 people with him, 12,000 slaves, 100 camels, each one carrying 300 pounds of pure gold. Think about that for a second. He was literally a moving city made of gold crossing the Sahara Desert. And here's what nobody tells you. When he stopped in Cairo to rest, he gave away so much gold that he crashed Egypt's economy for 12 years. 12 years. The value of gold plummeted because one man was too generous. Historians describe his wealth as incomprehensible and impossible to calculate. They literally ran out of words to describe how rich he was. Now jump forward to ancient Rome. Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor. Stanford professor Ian Morris discovered something that wasn't supposed to be public. Augustus personally owned 1/5 of the entire Roman Empire's economy. And the Roman Empire? It represented up to 30% of the world's GDP at the time. Let me show you what that means in today's money. Current estimates put Augustus's wealth at $4.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That makes him 30 times richer than Elon Musk. For comparison, the combined wealth of the world's 10 richest people today equals 1.2 trillion. Augustus alone was worth almost 4 times that. He personally owned all of Egypt, not invested in it, owned it. Every grain of wheat, every ounce of gold, every square mile, his property. Here's the key most people miss. Augustus controlled so much wealth that he personally funded 30 Roman legions and the entire welfare system. He was basically a one-man government budget. But wait, because it gets even more insane. Akbar, the great Mughal emperor of India from 1556 to 1605. His treasury held 90% of South Asia's wealth. Think about that, 90%. Rooms upon rooms, stacked with gold, silver, and precious gems, each commodity stored separately because there was too much to fit together. Here's what they don't want this public. By 1595, Akbar controlled 25% of the entire global GDP. His annual revenue? It was 1.75 million pounds when the entire British Empire's treasury was only 1.6 million pounds. And this was 200 years before Britain would claim to rule the world. The Mughal Empire under Akbar produced so much wealth through trade routes, taxation of gold and salt, and agricultural reforms that European travelers who visited couldn't believe what they were seeing. They wrote home describing a civilization so advanced, so wealthy, that it seemed impossible. Let me show you something else. When you compare the three, Mansa Musa had incomprehensible gold reserves. Augustus owned 1/5 of his empire's wealth directly. Akbar controlled 1/4 of the world's economic output. We're talking about wealth on a planetary scale. But here's what nobody tells you. Historians can't even agree on how to measure their wealth because the numbers break conventional economics. How do you calculate someone who owned Egypt? How do you value someone who could crash a country's economy by being too generous? How do you measure a man who controlled 1/4 of Earth's GDP? You can't. And that's exactly why they're not in your textbooks. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. If these men were the richest people who ever lived, why don't we learn about them? Here's the key. It's not an accident. Western education systems built their curricula around European history. The narrative they wanted to tell was about European superiority, European innovation, European power, acknowledging that an African king was wealthier than any European monarch ever dreamed, that an Asian emperor's treasury dwarfed the British crown 2 centuries before colonization, that Rome's greatest wealth came from outside Europe. That narrative wasn't supposed to be discovered. Think about what you learn in school. You learn about the Industrial Revolution, right? Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, the titans of American wealth. You probably learned those names. Their fortunes seem massive. Rockefeller is estimated at about $340 billion in today's money, and he's celebrated as the richest American ever. But wait, Augustus was worth $4.6 trillion. Akbar, possibly $21 trillion. Mansa Musa? Historians won't even put a number on it because it's too big. So why do we memorize Rockefeller but not Mansa Musa? Here's what nobody tells you. Historical narratives are curated. Someone decides what's important, what's worth teaching, what's worth remembering. And for a very long time, that someone decided African kings, Asian emperors, and non-European wealth weren't part of the story they wanted to tell. Let me show you exactly how deep this goes. When European cartographers started drawing maps in the 14th century after Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, they depicted him sitting on a throne of gold, holding a scepter of gold, wearing a crown of gold. They knew, everyone knew. He was legendary across 3 continents. But centuries later, as colonialism took hold, those same maps changed. Suddenly, African rulers were drawn as caricatures, uncivilized, primitive, backwards. The narrative shifted from Africa has incredible wealth and power to Africa needs to be civilized and controlled. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. So why does this matter? Why should you care about 3 rulers who died centuries ago? Because here's the key. If they can erase the richest people in history from education, what else have they erased? What other stories, what other achievements, what other civilizations have been quietly written out of the narrative? Let me show you the real impact. When you don't learn that Africa had the world's greatest gold reserves and most powerful kingdoms in the 14th century, you inherit a false understanding of the continent. When you don't learn that India controlled a quarter of global wealth 500 years ago, you miss the context for why colonialism happened. When you don't learn that civilizations outside Europe held unimaginable power, you accept a version of history that's incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Here's what nobody tells you. History isn't just about the past. It's about how we understand power, wealth, race, and civilization today. Think about this. We're taught that wealth and innovation come from the West. But Mali was building universities when Europe was in the Dark Ages. The Mughal Empire had infrastructure, trade networks, and economic systems that wouldn't exist in Europe for centuries. Rome's power came from conquering and extracting wealth from Africa and Asia. The richest people in history weren't who you think they were. The most powerful civilizations weren't where you think they were. The story you learned wasn't the complete story. $400 billion, 25% of global GDP, personal ownership of entire continents. These men existed. Their wealth was real. Their empires were documented by historians at the time who struggled to find words big enough to describe what they were witnessing. And someone decided you didn't need to know. Now you do. The question is, what else don't they want you to know?